Melbourne with Treasurer Josh Frydenberg and Assistant Treasurer Michael Sukkar, who's speaking now.
Staff here at the Australian Taxation Office. It's been a remarkable team effort. As the Commissioner has pointed out, it's been all hands on deck. There's been 810,000 lodgements, unprecedented numbers of calls, 600,000, and the fact that the ATO has been able to deal with those is a testament to the culture of the organisation and the fact that so many staff members have answered the call of the leadership of the ATO, and the Treasurer and I want to thank them particularly, because for the 10 million Australians receiving refunds, that can only happen with the dedicated work of the Tax Office. Can I also point out, it's clear there are 10 million Australians who will be receiving these tax cuts due to the delivery of our plan, the Morrison government's plan, ably led by the Treasurer, but despite the Labor Party. We saw last week the Labor Party putting every obstacle in our way to delivering these tax cuts. And so every single Australian, all 10 million of them who receive a refund from this Friday onwards, will know that is the government delivering on our plan for a better tax system, to increase aspiration, to put more money in your pocket, but conversely, that those refunds are flowing to you despite the Labor Party standing in our way every step of the way up until last week. So it's a wonderful day to be here, to see the Australian Taxation Office staff at the coalface and delivering on our plan for lower taxes for Australians. Thank you.
Take some questions, either the Commissioner or Michael or myself, on the issue of tax.
Treasurer, on the tax cut, the refund, I mean, how can we guarantee that people will spend this money on retail and recreation, thereby stimulating the economy, as opposed to just putting it towards their mortgage or not stimulating the economy? How can we guarantee that?
Well, it's not up to the government to tell Australians how to spend their money. It's for them, their families, for the individuals involved to determine their own priorities. But just yesterday, Michael and I were at a small business in Croydon South, and we met with Helen, who was on around $60,000 a year. Her husband also earns less than $90,000, so together they're going to get $2,160 in their pockets once they put in their tax return. And we asked Helen how is she going to spend her money, and she said on home improvements that she'd been waiting for some time. I've had other messages from people in my local community telling me about their priorities for the spending of the money that will come their way. I'm very confident this money will be used to ensure greater economic activity. It will be used at the local shop. It will be supporting local employers and local businesses. The money will be spent in accordance with the priorities of each individual Australian, as it should.
You have said that infrastructure projects, as well as this tax cut, will help stimulate the economy. What's the contingency plan, though, if it doesn't? Is the forecast surplus the contingency plan?
Just before we get to that, is there any more tax questions for the Commissioner or for Michael? Yes.
Just one, Commissioner. How soon will those tax returns be refunded?
We will have some refunds landing in people's bank accounts by Friday this week. We were able to start processing on the weekend, on Sunday, because we could lift all the safety nets that we have to put returns through, to test. We look at them before they go in and what comes out, to make sure that the expected result is there. So all tax returns, all safety nets have been lifted. And even if you lodged your return last week, you still don't need to do anything, because the legislation was passed so quickly. We will be able to pay the full amount to anyone who's entitled to that by Friday as a starting point, and thereafter every day following. At the peak of last year, 84% of returns were processed within 5 days, and on average over the whole of tax time, from the beginning of July to the end of October, it was 75%.
Any other questions to the Commissioner? Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chris.
In relation to your question about the infrastructure rollout and the tax cuts, well, there's a number of things that are happening at once. We've had interest rate cuts, which will see, again, a substantial reduction in interest payments for many Australian families. We've got the $100 billion worth of infrastructure projects that are being rolled out, and many of these projects have been on the drawing board for half a century or more, like Snowy 2.0, which is a major energy project, or the new airport rail link in Victoria that Victorians have been waiting for decades for, or the second airport in Sydney. They are all important nation-building projects that will boost the productive capacity of the economy. You've also had some changes to the regulatory standards that APRA is holding the banks to. Now, those changes will also ensure more money is flowing through the economy and helping the flow of credit, and we've already heard from the banks to that effect. So there are a number of things that are happening together with these tax cuts that will continue to see strong economic activity across the Australian economy. And we've just heard today on the front page of one of the nation's newspapers, S&P, Standard & Poor's, who have said how important a surplus is to Australia maintaining its AAA credit rating. And we, under Scott Morrison, understand the importance of delivering faithfully to the Australian people our commitments at the last election. And they were spelled out in the budget on April the 2nd. A budget surplus, the first surplus in more than a decade. A pro-growth agenda of tax cuts, which have now been legislated, infrastructure spending and 80,000 new apprentices, and also the social dividend that you get from a strong economy, namely record spending on schools, on hospitals, a fully funded National Disability Insurance Scheme, more support for our carers and for mental health. These are our priorities as a government. This is why the Australian people voted us in at the election, and we will faithfully stick to that agenda.
So the forecast surplus is in no way at risk because the AAA rating is that essential to Australia's economy. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the AAA credit rating is absolutely critical to Australia's economic standing, and as you know, a AAA credit rating affects the cost of borrowing. And Australia is one of only 10 developed nations in the world to have a AAA credit rating from the three leading credit rating agencies, Fitch, Moody's and Standard & Poor's, and will continue to ensure good economic management, which has been praised by those credit rating agencies. And it's important to understand that if it wasn't for the Howard and Costello government's success in paying down Labor's debt, Australia wouldn't have had the fiscal flexibility to spend through that economic downturn when it hit in the name of the GFC. So what we need to ensure is we continue to pay down that debt as appropriate and as we're able to do. And this surplus that we will deliver in 2019-20 will be the first surplus in more than a decade. And we as coalition members, Liberals and Nationals, we believe in that fundamental value that the next generation should not pick up the tab for the last. And that means responsible budget management and delivering budget surpluses, as we will do.
The Reserve Bank wants more infrastructure spending. Your infrastructure plan is in line with the long-term average. New South Wales and Victoria are doing a lot more of the heavy lifting in terms of putting more money in. Should you step up, particularly in other states, to try and get above that long-run average?
Well, actually, when Labor was last in office, they were spending about $6 billion a year on infrastructure. We'll be spending $10 to $11 billion a year. That's and plus, and that is as a result of an extra $23 billion of infrastructure spending that we announced in the budget. I mean, this is a record pipeline of $100 billion. Now, it's on big nation-building projects that I mentioned, but it's also on $4 billion worth of congestion-busting projects, whether that's improvement to roads, commuter car park funds to enable people to get a car park as they take the train into work, removing cars from our busy roads, or removing level crossings, which can also be quite a terrible burden on commuters. So there is a number of things that we're doing in terms of our infrastructure spending that Michael McCormack as Deputy Prime Minister and Alan Tudge are working on together, talking to the states. The Prime Minister's already spoken to a number of the premiers about the various infrastructure projects, working on timelines, ensuring good coordination. I've been speaking to treasurers. In fact, just last Friday I met with the New South Wales Treasurer where we discussed infrastructure. So we are working as closely as we can with state governments to ensure the most effective rollout of infrastructure projects.
So is there money there for states? If they come forward and say, all right, we want to kickstart things, stimulate our economy, will you have that? Is there money there?
There's already money there for states. Because let's be clear, in Victoria, which Michael and I know obviously very closely, this being our state. We're putting down $5 billion for the Melbourne Airport rail link, and we're expecting the state government, as they've announced, to do the same. We've put $2 billion